everyone. Welcome to the session. I hope you can hear me and you're all tuned in on channel 1 for this workshop. And I realized that we're going to be talking about the implementation of the Global Digital Compact. Thank you all for not being in the room next door. That has a way cooler title because they're talking about closing the computing gap on AI. This sounds crucial, but I hope that my fellow panelists will explain how what we're talking about here about the implementing the Global Digital Compact is relevant as well. And the focus of this chat this afternoon will be on how the Global Digital Compact can deliver for inclusiveness and can deliver for our constituency, for the people on the ground, and especially for vulnerable people. I'm delighted to be joined, and I will make a round of introduction, and I will leave them the floor. From your right to the left, we have Guilherme with UNESCO. Is a director wearing his new hat of director for digital inclusion. Some of you might know him for his previous work still at UNESCO on information integrity. Tobekile, she's senior manager, I think, for service. Correct me if I'm getting the title wrong. Tobekile from Paradigm Initiative, a civil society organization. She's a senior manager for partnerships and engagement. To my right, Leanda, she's the executive director of Five Rights, a foundation active in protecting child rights in the digital domain and beyond the digital domain. Eugenio from Itamaraty, from the government of Brazil, is a director for science, technology, innovation, and intellectual property. Definitely a person that you might want to follow on LinkedIn, formerly Deputy Consul General in San Francisco and a thought leader in this area. Last but not least, we have Katie from UNHCR. She worked in a number of countries around the globe, working on refugees and vulnerable population. Now she's a senior manager for covering information integrity, and in a second we'll hear more from them. Maybe to set the stage of where we are, what is this Global Digital Compact thing, what they've been doing within the United Nations system so far. You probably all know, if you're here, that the Global Digital Compact was adopted in September 2024 by consensus by the world leaders, and what we've been thinking over the last few months is how we can best support member states to deliver on their ambition, how we can start implementing the Global Digital Compact in the areas where member states decided that action has to be taken by the UN. There are several initiatives that have already started in different areas. You can think of the working group on data governance established within the CSTD in Geneva. You can think of the ongoing negotiations in New York to establish a scientific panel on artificial intelligence and a global dialogue on AI governance. And way more than that, there is an upcoming report of the Secretary General on innovative financing option for capacity building, and there are plenty more activities that are being started, implemented by different parts of the system. And of course, there is all of you, there is civil society, there is the technical community, there is the private sector that are already taking actions that rhyme very well with the Global Digital Compact. Inside the UN, we have a very good cooperation mechanism, labeled Working Group on Digital Technology, that is led by the Office for Digital and Emerging Technology, and by ITU, and with several co-chairs from all the relevant agencies, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNESCO, UNDP, UNU, UNIDO, UNCTAD, and plenty more. And we are using that to coordinate. There are plenty of opportunities for all of you to hear about updates of what we have been doing. We are hosting some of the town halls. And of course, I highly encourage you to engage with the different entities and agencies of the UN that are leading the substantive work. After this chapeau, this conversation is not about bureaucratic structure, or is not about explaining what has been done, how we got to the Global Digital Compact, but it's about what's coming next and how different activities are contributing to this goal. Guilherme, maybe the question for all of you is how this digital inclusion dimension that is in the Global Digital Compact, how the activities that you're working on are contributing to that. And I know that UNESCO hosted recently an event for public sector and artificial intelligence, but also I would be very curious if you could touch upon the information integrity space. So Katie might close the circle after that.
Thank you very much, Filippo, for the kind invitation, for being here. Thank you all for being resistant and resilient until this late time in the day. Let me start. Many years ago, I interviewed a former president of a Latin American country, and I asked him, what do you think was the most interesting thing you learned for being a president? And then he told me, I learned that we all politicians, at least according to him in Latin America, we have the same syndrome. That is the syndrome of Adam. We think the world started with ourselves. And I'm saying this because the Global Digital Compact beauty is not about exactly proposing something entirely new, although there is one or two things very interesting that are new. Is the huge and interesting exercise of looking across the border in the UN system, but also in the concrete policies in our 190 plus member states, in trying to come with a comprehensive framework saying, look, those are the key areas that we agree that are urgent for the immediate future. And with this, if what I said is true, that this facilitates a lot the logic of implementation. Because we can take this commitment and say, look, what we are doing here is trying to help you to be more coherent in what you are already doing and in what you committed, in this case in New York, etc., in terms of implementation. The other big problem that this same politician told me that he faced when he was president is that they have a tendency to approve a law and so on, and the policy, and then the next step is to create a committee for deciding how to implement the law, right? So it's another layer. So we don't need to wait anything. If you want to take just one takeaway of what I'm going to say to here during this session, we need to start implementing now. And it's ready, and the urgencies are there, and the concrete elements are there. The commitments were made last year in New York. Of course, we can always go deeper in the details of this and that, but it's ready to be implemented, and it's urgent to be implemented. In that sense, two quick examples. The Global Digital Compact touches several areas of the agenda of UNESCO. Filippo mentioned information integrity. There are important issues related, for example, to independent media and so on. So we have several structures in UNESCO. For example, there is an intergovernmental body called IPDC that deals particularly with this part. There is another one called the FAP that deals more with the digital transformation part. So what we are doing in UNESCO is, from the moment it was approved, to convey to our constituencies, also using the WSIS framework, etc., our constituencies of journalists, of judges, of regulators, of electoral authorities, saying, here it is, here are the key elements of the Global Digital Compact that you can start implementing now, and here are the tools from UNESCO that you can use to be implemented. For example, we are Secretariat of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, and you see how the Global Digital Compact and the Pact of the Future connected a lot the agenda of multilingualism with the overall idea of meaningful connectivity and so on. Again, we don't need to create another story. We need to say to these structures of multilingualism, let's start implementing this immediately. And then to conclude, two things. Capacity building, of course, is a major story there. Several of the member states were very adamant on that. So this conference that Filippo mentioned, we did a few weeks ago, a conference in Paris, concentrate on this aspect, capacity building of public servants, on the aspects of digital transformation, artificial intelligence, and we create an alliance of national schools of public administration, so those that are in charge of training public servants, and we are discussing with them precisely how they can incorporate the Global Digital Compact and start implementing this in the in-service and pre-service training of public servants. And then final aspect, and this is one of the very important innovations of the Global Digital Compact, is to bring the discussion of information integrity to the heart of the overall discussion of digital policies. And in that case, many of you followed, UNESCO launched prior to the compact global guidelines for the governance of digital platforms with a strong set of recommendations on how to do information integrity policies while protecting freedom of expression and access to information. As you can imagine, easy to say, not as that easy to do, but several of these networks of regulators are using these guidelines and now connecting with the Global Digital Compact to move forward. So I'll stop here, but glad to take questions later on.
Thank you, Guillermo, and absolutely on your first point that we need to start implementing now. Tobekile, thinking the question is the same, how we can encourage this inclusion dimension. And I'm thinking that some of your digital inclusion programs that you run, I know the down digital readiness program, you have software engineering school, projects that make a concrete impact on the ground. What's the relationship with these high-level commitments of a global framework, and how do you mainstream it in the activities that you do? How do these things go together?
Thank you so much for that. And thanks for mentioning that this is high level. I think the Global Digital Compact is one of those very lovely, good documents that, meets the checklist. It talks about all the things that you want to hear. It talks about connectivity. It talks about human rights even. It talks about expanding inclusion. But it remains a consensus document that it can be really very high level unless it cascades down to communities. It remains a global digital compact for global optics. But I want to refer to something that is really concerning for us as Paradigm Initiative. Having done work on the African continent, is that on the ground there's no real implementation of the GDC. Or even acknowledgement that it's such an important, document with key commitments that have been made towards things that are critical to the African continent, and specifically connectivity, and not just connectivity, but meaningful, access to the internet, meaningful connectivity. So from our perspective, I think through the work that we are doing, we've seen that definitely there's, a huge digital divide. And ITU has mentioned that I think from Africa's population, 38% are online, which means that there's still a very huge, group of, of people that are excluded from, being on the internet, and digital access basically is a problem. And that needs to be addressed. And the GDC has articulated what needs to happen. It's also highlighted some of those gaps, gaps in availability, accessibility, as well as affordability, and also, the importance of ensuring that at least, there's a digital skills strategy. And what we're seeing on the ground is that that has not started being implemented. And last year at the AGFest ordinary session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights as Paradigm Initiative, we were able to convene an engagement with representatives from, national human rights institutions on the African continent, as well as civil society organizations. And, this was something new, basically, about the GDC, and that was, I think, a few months after, its adoption, and there was a lack of knowledge. So capacity building, raising awareness are some of the critical things that need to happen, like as soon as yesterday, for relevant entities like your national human rights institutions, your civil society actors to be able to even also engage and hold governments accountable for what they committed to in the process of, adopting the GDC itself. And I think one thing that I would also highlight is that through our work, we are able to bring digital literacy skills to communities, and that's how we are plugging in with realizing what the GDC also speaks about. The good thing is that the GDC highlights the important role of different stakeholders, which is a very good thing in the context of multi-stakeholderism and how different stakeholders can plug in. And we've got digital literacy programs that we run. We've got our life legacy program that we run in different countries, where we go into communities and build their capacity on how they can use digital tools and digital technologies. We also engage with policymakers as well around policy issues and how they can also be, implementing what the GDC has said and what they've committed to as well at a global level. Last month, we also had an engagement. I'll specifically speak about some of our work. I think, Zambia was very, pivotal in facilitating the GDC process, and we were able to engage, with the Zambian government, but at country level, engaging with civil society. They were still, looking out to know more about how they can also, get involved and how civil society can get involved. But the major thing that was coming out of that engagement is that there was a disconnect between what happens at global level when governments adopt these processes and what actually happens on the ground. There was an urgent need for, that interface between governments and civil society on the ground to be able to engage on what governments agree to at global level, and also just getting that awareness on the ground to the actors on the ground. So I think that's something that we are also doing as Paradigm Initiative. We host the Digital Rights and Inclusion Forum, and we've been also able to convene conversations around the Global Digital Compact as well to raise awareness. So I think, for me, it's awareness raising as well as building capacity of local actors to be able to engage and also ensure that there's implementation of the GDC.
Thank you so much, and absolutely on the need to cascade down to communities. And again, their civil society plays and must play a very important role also in their outreach to national authorities, to the local government, to mobilize and to make sure that is not only in some documents, but is reflected on the ground. And something that I find it's interesting that in all these frameworks that we have, I think we must move from correlation to causation. It's not enough to say, hey, we adopted this framework and this thing happened because the market forces or because of other external dynamics. We need to make sure that these frameworks that we agreed upon, they are able to move the needle. They're only as good as they're able to move the needle. Talking about moving the needle, a needle that was moved during the negotiation of the Global Digital Compact was children protection, the child dimension of the compact. That was very weak, if I may, at the very beginning, but thanks to the advocacy of organizations like Five Rights, was strengthened and is a key core part of the Global Digital Compact. And again, with this idea that is only as good as is able to cascade down to community. Maybe, Leanda, you can elaborate on some of your activities and how they relate to the compact.
Thank you so much, Filippo, and hello everyone. Very happy to be here today. Indeed, we were delighted by the results of the Global Digital Compact, and it wasn't to be taken for granted, because as you say at the beginning, there was not much. As usual, children generally are forgotten. Especially when it comes to the digital space, children have been forgotten really from the start. The digital space, the internet, was not designed for children, and they continue to be largely ignored. Their voices, although they have a right to participation and to be heard in issues that affect them, and the digital environment certainly affects them, are very, very largely absent. But there was a huge mobilization of civil society to ensure that children's rights were central to the Global Digital Compact. And I would say that this is one area where, unfortunately, market forces do not make any difference. And on the contrary, there is a very strong commercial incentive to ignore children's rights and to very, very heavily exploit children on the services that they use online. So mobilizing and ensuring that we do have commitment from governments, national authorities, civil society, basically accountability of the tech sector is absolutely critical. It is also really, really critical to have global standards in this area. The services that children use, and it's a relatively narrow range of services. We're not talking about the entire digital environment, but most children are using the same services around the world. It's mostly social media, gaming, search, and education technology in particular, although of course there are others. But these are the services that children around the world are using and spending huge amounts of time on. So having a global approach to basically regulate global companies and ensure that they go against their commercial incentives to very heavily exploit children and instead deliver something that is at a minimum rights respecting is really, really critical. And so the Global Digital Compact is a very important step in this direction. I would just say that when it comes to kids, inclusion, yes, they do have a right indeed to participate and to be included, and digital inclusion is very, very important for them. But it really is a question of included in what. They must be included in a rights-respecting digital environment, and as I say, an environment that has been designed with them in mind. The digital world will not be safe, and children will not thrive in the digital environment unless they are taken into account when the systems that they use are designed and rolled out from the start. At the moment, as I said, it's heavily commercial, and effectively children are systematically exposed to risks and harms. And this is indeed because all of those services that they are using basically are designed with three main aims, which is, so the brief that designers are given are increase time spent on the service, increase reach, and increase engagement. And this results in very heavy, persuasive, behavioural, manipulative design of these services, which is leading to problems such as anxiety, depression, ADHD, body dysmorphia, self-harm, suicide, harassment, and child sexual abuse, just to name but a few, and this has been going absolutely through the roof. Children, if you ask them, will tell you they expect to see something different. So we know the impact, and the Global Digital Compact, is a way of saying again that children's rights need to be respected. And I would say that the children's piece actually had a little bit of a head start, because there is already under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the General Comment number 25, which sets out exactly how this higher bar of rights for children applies in the digital environment. So that was already there a few years back. There was also the year before the Global Digital Compact, there was an UNGA, a General Assembly resolution, so member states again committing to taking this piece forward. But in the end, it doesn't make any difference, as you said, unless it cascades down into real practical changes in the lived experience of children. And that requires governments to go beyond nice policy statements and general commitments into policy, legislation, and most difficultly, having the political will to actually enforce against a sector which is very, very powerful and invests an awful lot in lawyers and making enforcement incredibly difficult. So as I say, this requires political will, but we are getting there. I would just mention, before my time runs out, a few of the areas where advances have been made. So the African Union now has a child online safety and empowerment policy. It's going up on the agenda in ASEAN as well. At the regional level, also, the Council of Europe adopted its treaty on AI, framework treaty on AI, which includes special provisions for children. At the European level, the Digital Services Act the European Commission is finalising guidelines specifically on children's safety, security and privacy in the digital environment. The AI Act also includes specific provisions for children. There are online safety legislation in the UK, now being debated in Canada, Malaysia. There's a lot of stuff in Australia, and in particular there are age-appropriate design codes and technical standards that go with it in places like the UK, but also on the table passed already in Indonesia, on the table in Argentina, and elsewhere. And there's really good stuff in Brazil. So with that, I think I can stop.
Yeah, that's a perfect transition. I was about to say that one of the governments that has been the most active in several areas of the Global Digital Compact is the Brazilian government, I'm thinking of President Lula's commitment to AI governance. This is actually predate, of course, the Global Digital Compact. And some of the priorities of the G20 presidency mirror very closely what is in the GDC. I'm thinking of information integrity. I'm thinking of the environmental dimension. I'm thinking, again, the AI governance dimension. So, Eugenio, maybe you can elaborate on how the G20 presidency relate to the Global Digital Compact. And I know that Brazil is chairing the BRICS Summit. So maybe on this alignment between your international priorities and what's the Global Digital Compact and what do you see, where are we going from here?
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I hope we can close all digital divides, not only the computer divide for the panel next door, but this is, when you talk about inclusivity, we should remember that 1/3 of the world's population is still offline. And by the way, protection of children and the youth is also a top priority for us in the digital domain. But I think you are familiar with the Brazil's Internet Steering Committee, also known as CGI. We are celebrating 30 years, and some of you may also be familiar with the São Paulo multi-stakeholder guidelines adopted last year during the Net Mundial +10, because we believe that a multi-stakeholder approach is the best way to ensure inclusion and diversity. But as a background to our discussion, I want to talk about the G20, BRICS, and other initiatives. Because when we talk about the implementation of the GDC, what we need to face is a very challenging political situation, especially this year, with growing polarization, geopolitical tensions, ideological divide. Some people talk about a new tech Cold War. And maybe we should ask developing countries what their priorities are, if this is what they need or what they want. Because our approach, so now talking about the G20, because we have the presidency of India, then Brazil last year, the next now, this year is South Africa. So I think we are much on the same page, bringing this Global South perspective to the G20, when they have the Digital Economy Working Group, when we suggest 4 priorities. One is a universal and meaningful connectivity, which is basic, since we still have a lot to do to achieve digital citizenship for all. And another priority was DPI, the digital public infrastructure, including digital public services and allowing people to have access to digital tools and being able to participate in this digital environment. The third priority was information integrity, as Guilherme also mentioned. Was the first time information integrity was addressed within the G20. And the fourth priority was AI. In this case, we were highlighting the need for AI governance that is development-oriented to reduce inequalities. So that's a way that we address the problems of inclusion. And I think we were successful bringing these issues to the table. And we adopt a declaration in the city of Maceió. Maybe you can download this and have a look. The Maceió Declaration on the Digital Economy by the G20 last September. Now, talking about the BRICS, now have the presidency of BRICS with the summit of leaders next month in Rio de Janeiro. And we negotiated the first ever statement by the leaders of the BRICS on AI governance. And again, the same approach that we had within the G20, we also brought this to the BRICS. Just an example, the idea of that access to AI technologies should be fair, equitable, enabling, and inclusive. So all countries, regardless of the stage of economic development, they have the right to benefit from and develop and use AI tools. We stress the need for international cooperation to facilitate access to AI technologies and critical components, and to remove barriers to financial resources required for AI research and innovation. So this is, of course, G20 is different from the BRICS, but our approach is much the same, bringing these issues to the table. And then we have now COP30 coming on climate change is, of course, a huge challenge. And we will host in Belém next November, COP30, the first ever COP in the Amazon rainforest. And we like to say that when we seek inclusivity for the most vulnerable groups, including indigenous peoples, because we are inviting people to come and see by themselves how life is in the Amazon. So please come, but also we know that it's nearly impossible to have everyone physically there. So we are trying to see how we can have a metaverse or something that would, we will take this digital technology to help us make sure that stakeholders globally have the opportunity to engage. And of course, you know the principle of nothing about us without us. So I think this is important to highlight. And everything is integrated in terms of the challenge that we face, including connectivity in the Amazon region, because the most underserved region in Brazil is precisely the north, in the Amazon, in remote areas. So I think it's still a challenge, but that's what we are trying to do. And I think I will stop here. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. You mentioned the challenging political situation. You mentioned, of course, connectivity. Without connectivity, we are not going anywhere. And there is a 2.6 billion that are still offline. And this is as much an issue of supply, but it's more of an issue of demand. I think the data from ITU, and I don't want to quote the wrong figure, but I think only 400 or 500 million people live in an area where there is no access to connectivity, but there is a demand issue. You mentioned information integrity being, for the first time, on the G20 agenda. In the political situation that we're all living in, content moderation that picked up speed a few years ago, we are seeing this trend being rolled back. And we know that when content moderation is not there, where policies are not there, the first to be damaged are vulnerable people, and refugees is one of the first categories that come to mind. So maybe coming back to information integrity, Katie, you might want to zoom in on your project and talk about that.
Sure, thank you. Thanks everyone as well for the opportunity to be here. And I just wanted to sort of say at the maybe what seems to be the small detail level, but incredibly important level, was that at the Digital Global Compact level, refugees are included as an identified group. And this is vitally important for us because just like children, for a long time, they've been almost like a silent group when we've been talking about digital. And very often this is because, you know, the digital divide that we all talk about is really pronounced for people experiencing forced displacement. And so if you think about maybe where are the largest refugee hosting settlements on the African continent, for a long time, they were in places where connectivity wasn't, or we saw sort of patchy internet that really didn't necessarily enable them to sort of access meaningfully connectivity services. So that's great. We're really pleased to have seen sort of the focus or, you know, the inclusion of refugees. And that's a really important part of sort of how we as UNHCR, you know, are sort of leveraging this as an opportunity to really try and, you know, get the importance of refugee inclusion in these conversations on the agenda. And, you know, thanks again to sort of Paradigm, we were able to talk about refugee inclusion and information integrity at the Digital Rights and Inclusion Forum. Just recently, we had the Protection of Civilians Week in New York, sponsored by Brazil, allowing us to bring the issues to the table. I think concretely it's really worth mentioning, as you say, where we see sort of the polarization of conversations. You know, there is a sense of sort of othering that is definitely being exacerbated. We see scapegoating of, you know, non-foreign nationals in many, many contexts across the globe. And on the receiving end of this are very often refugees and forcibly displaced people. And the level of toxicity and hate and, we see that online in some contexts, and those who were in a previous panel, the panel members that we had were able to talk directly about how in South Africa, online hate towards foreigners, including refugees, resulted in real life harm. And this caused, destruction to property, but also resulted in death ultimately. And so that's something that definitely needs to be addressed. But it's not an easy solution to fix. And I think that as we're able to sort of much more sort of focus on some of the I guess conditions or enabling factors that are sort of part of the compact, is really looking at how the importance of this multi-stakeholder approach has been absolutely critical to us as well. So at a concrete level within UNHCR, we've really tried to make an effort to deliver on sort of the commitments that we see within the compact, but really want to sort of think about how we can leverage maybe unique to us partners. Paradigm, for example, we've only started just to sort of really think about how we can work with people who are in sort of working on digital rights, for example. And that's something that has been a new partnership for us. And I think that's really important that we start to try and explore those digital rights actors. We're really also taking that nothing about us without us approach and looking at how we can work with communities to try and sort of create content that will counter these toxic narratives, that will really work to try and sort of promote, refugee voices and stories that are hopefully looking to sort of counter, toxicity and think about inclusion, that are really, really important as well. And so we've actually had the opportunity to be able to implement a number of pilot projects across diverse contexts and with multiple partners, including the private sector, government, digital rights, civil society and refugee-led organizations as well. And through this process, and hopefully to, start to address the how do you take it into practice, we've developed an information integrity toolkit that pulls together a number of sort of practical steps that people can, take, tools that people can use to try and address information risks in forced displacement contexts. This is a constantly evolving, situation, and we know that we don't actually have, the one-size-fits-all silver bullet solution to this. But I would really urge sort of partners to sort of think about how they can collaborate with us, how they can use these tools, because this is a challenge that is a sort of whole of society issue, and it's going to take multiple partners to address. So I'm very happy to share the link to the toolkit afterwards. If you have tools that you also want to share with us, please do. And the beauty of this toolkit, just to sort of say one final point of it, is I think it really speaks to the spirit of the compact as well. It draws on tools that civil society have developed. It draws on tools that our sister agencies have developed as well. It has strong links to, tools that media development agencies have also created. And I think it's really important that we realize we're not in this alone. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. And using IGF, that is the best platform we have for multi-stakeholder conversation. I know I have a second round of questions for my panelists, but I would invite right now, if you have any observation or question, you can see some mic over there. We'll be able to take 2 or 3 observations or question, and then we'll go back to our panelists. I would kindly invite you to introduce yourself and to be brief if possible.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. This is Mohammad Abdullah Konu from Bangladesh. I'm looking for Bangladesh Internet Governance Forum. I'm a Secretary General. I have 3 observations. As the Global Digital Compact moves from agreement to implementation, how can we ensure that the voice of grassroots and national level multi-stakeholder initiative, especially from the Global South, are meaningfully included in shaping the governance mechanism and accountability frameworks? Another observation, what role do national IGF and local actors play in global commitment with local initiative? And third observation, big Rohingya refugee live in Bangladesh territory. They are not allowed to have mobile connection. Thank you.
Thank you. If we might go to my left, that is to the right, please.
Thank you. My name is Wolfgang Kleinwächter. I'm a retired professor from the University of Aarhus. We speak about the implementation of the Global Digital Compact. And I think the representative from UNESCO was very wise to say that the GDC itself is an element in a process which started already years ago and has seen a lot of iterations, you know, the WSIS documents, then we had a number of commissions, we had the roadmap of the digital, of the Secretary General, and now we have the Global Compact. And it was a permanent improvement. And so the Global Digital Compact is the next step in right direction, which is goes to the 2030s. So my point is, you should be very careful not to isolate the implementation of the Global Digital Compact from the other processes, but to include them. And with WSIS Plus 20, we have a great opportunity, and it would be good if ODAT would, you know, strengthen this close cooperation or integration between WSIS Plus 20 and the GDC. You mentioned also the working group on technology, emerging technologies, and you mentioned a number of organizations. We have UNGIS. UNGIS is a good instrument already, so there is no need to add something more, but what is needed is to strengthen the multi-stakeholder engagement. And the proposal made by the Swiss government to add a multi-stakeholder advisory group to UNGIS would be a good idea, and if this would get the support from ODAT, this would be a good step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang.
Thanks, Filippo. My name is Jacqueline Pigato. I'm with Data Privacy Brazil, civil society. I was going to say the same point that Professor Kleinwachter about the WSIS Plus 20. I would like to hear thoughts of the panel on the integration of the GDC with the WSIS action lines, and also if there are conversations or if you envision the establishment of some targets and metrics for the implementation so we can follow and also as an accountability mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last
Thank
intervention,
you.
please.
My name is Adel Magid. I am a judge at the Egyptian Court of Cassation in Egypt, and I am honorary professor of law at Durham University. I am going to complete on the same person who is sitting here on the modalities to implement. This is what I can see. This is one problem, or this is the main focus of this workshop. And I heard some voices that were saying that it is a non-binding instrument. So when you say it is a non-binding instrument, it is, yeah, of course it is non-binding instrument, but you're underestimating of its value, its power. We have the same problem with the global compact on safe and orderly and regular migration. It is the same issue. Compact, soft law. But when you aim to implement the provision of this compact or even enforce it, just refer to existing international binding instruments. For example, for these hate speech issues, the Security Council has issued many resolutions on hate speech. So you can enforce the articles in this compact of reservation through the security. When it comes about cyber crimes against children, for example, you refer to the new instrument that has been issued last December by the UN Convention Against Cyber Crimes. It covered many issues concerning human rights, children rights, cyber crimes. So this is the modality that you can use to implement and enforce the provision of this compact. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will turn to the speaker and maybe to connect what we heard last from the professor with the first intervention from Mohammed. That was about how we can ensure the voices of multi-stakeholders are meaningfully included into this. And in my understanding, this goes beyond law and legislation. There is something that law and legislation can deliver. There are some of the objectives of different compacts or different non-binding instruments and General Assembly resolution that cannot be achieved with legislation alone. But I don't know who want to take on this multi-stakeholder dimension and how we can better implement, maybe relying on some other initiative or legislation that is out there. Who volunteers? Guilherme?
I can comment very briefly on different things that were mentioned on the grassroots. I didn't mention in my initial remarks because I didn't want to steal the thunder from Eugenio, but since he didn't, I will say it. One of the things we also did together with Brazil under the G20 is this global initiative on information integrity and climate change. And why I'm mentioning this, one essential component of this initiative is actually to support grassroots initiatives to understand the problem of information integrity and climate change, and for those grassroots initiatives to produce knowledge on that. And this example is very interesting because it's the very concrete idea of implementing, for example, the information integrity components of the Global Digital Compact, connecting with climate change, connecting with access to data in the digital platforms and so on. So if you are interested, actually we have an open call for proposals until 6th of July. Just Google it, Global Information Integrity, and you can apply for this. And then, of course, on the question of the justice, I mean, I think this is our permanent challenge. How we actually include the duty bearers in this conversation. This is particularly fundamental, the judges, the regulators, and so on. And we connect what is essentially multilateral policy document, that is the Global Digital Compact, with the wealth of international legislation and international jurisprudence of the human rights courts. Because it's not only about the ICCPR, or that are of course fundamental, but it's also how the international courts have interpreted the implementation of this. But again, this in the digital environment connects very well with one of the, as I mentioned in the beginning, one of the key provisions of the Global Digital Compact, that is capacity building. Because, I mean, as you know, you are a professor, many of your colleagues in different, and judges and prosecutors in different countries, they still have several lack of knowledge of how they can implement the agreements their own countries have already ratified in the international arena in the national context. And in this case of the digital environment, this is absolutely central for protecting children's issues, for protecting migrants' issues, and so on and so forth. So I will stop here with these two comments, Filippo.
And since it's often governments and the UN that we opine about a lot of acronyms, I would like to hear from Tobekile and from Leanda on how do you think that this multi-stakeholder model can be strengthened? How can we help what you're doing on the ground?
Thank you so much. I'll start by maybe perhaps responding on how to include voices of communities in accountability frameworks. I think there's really need for, that kind of cascading of information down to communities to be able to empower them, especially when processes are happening, so that people are able to be aware of the processes that are happening on the ground, and there should be meaningful consultations, engagements with different stakeholders at country level to feed into, global submissions by states that then feed into what is adopted as accountability frameworks at global level. And that is something that is very important. And I think national IGFs as well, I think the conversation would largely look at strengthening as well their capacity to be able to be those relevant platforms where there's multi-stakeholder engagements around critical issues, especially around, meaningful connectivity as we are speaking about inclusion in this context. I also highlight as well that it is important when we're looking at as well the handshake, I would like to call it, the synergy when we're looking at these processes, global processes, and looking at the Global Digital Compact, and what says that it is important to highlight the importance of sustaining the inclusive multi-stakeholder model so that it remains intact and is even more strengthened. Supporting as well the distinct function of the Internet Governance Forum and its role as a platform for assessing implementation of the GDC itself. And I think that's something that is important to echo as well, affirming as well the WOSIS process and ensuring that there's promotion of its ability to actually give a voice to the affected communities is something that is very important. And I think maybe, just reflect on that at this point.
Thank you. And do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you so much. So multi-stakeholder approach, yes. Obviously, I said before, first of all, that children need to be at the table. They have a right, and they are generally not. But then, of course, in order to make things that work, you need, a variety of expertise and stakeholders at the table. Since we started working on children's rights in the digital environment more than a decade ago at Five Rights, we have prided ourselves on developing practical tools in collaboration with a variety of stakeholders, notably engineers. So most recently, for example, this is the Children and AI Design Code, which was developed over more than a year with AI experts, engineers, and child rights experts, and of course children. So the tools are there, developed in a multi-stakeholder approach. But then I want to say specifically that in terms of implementation of the Global Digital Compact when it comes to children, meaningful implementation by the required stakeholders is highly problematic when there are not the resources. There is a massive, massive imbalance of power and resources between, in this case, the tech sector, where in the Global Digital Compact it says very clearly, as it does in the General Comment 25, as it does also in the UNGA resolution, that this is a sector that, in order to deliver to children, absolutely has to be regulated. Right? So the bit I'm talking about is the regulation. And this regulation, we have tried self-regulation, and it has not worked. The time has come for much more robust regulation. And for that, what we face is civil society and regulators who are way out of their depth. There is very little knowledge. There is very, very little capacity. And as I mentioned before, there is a huge amount of resources on the other side. So capacity building for regulators and civil society is urgently, urgently needed if this is to be a meaningful process where we end up with results that deliver for children and humanity.
Thank you. Wolfgang, the professor, asked a specific question on a UN mechanism, and who better than Eugenio, there is also an UN veteran, to answer the question if you have thoughts on how we can best reconcile GDC and WSIS.
First, I want to thank Guilherme for being so kind to bring this issue to our discussion. Indeed, during the G20 summits last November, we launched the Global Initiative on Information Integrity and Climate Change. And this is a partnership between the government of Brazil, UNESCO, and the UN Secretariat, specifically the Department of Global Communications. I'll be happy to give you, if you are interested in more details about this, when we finish this panel. But yes, I will try to address some of the questions, because the implementation of the GDC is already ongoing. Right now, this week, there are discussions in New York. Of course, they have the working group on data governance. They have already started their work. But for the AI track, which is very important for the GDC, they are at the UN discussing the third draft of the terms of reference and modalities for both the International Independent Scientific Panel on AI and the Global Dialogue on AI Governance. So these are same package, and of course negotiations, they are not easy, as we know, but right now there is a procedure, that is a science procedure, that will end tomorrow, and we'll see if some delegations will break the silence, or perhaps if they are not happy with the outcome as it is. But the panel, the scientific panel now, the proposal is to have 40 members. So our friend from Bangladesh mentioned about the Global South and how we can secure inclusion, because there is a limitation that for these experts to be chosen, have a limitation of maximum 2 per nationality. So we can't have the same country, like for example, with 5, 6 people or in the same panel. So this, I think, would allow some sort of both gender balance and geographical balance and some diversity. But of course, we need to make sure also that expertise is taken into account for these members to be appointed. But this is an ongoing. So, and the question about how we can incorporate the GDC and the WIS's plus 20 review process, and that's something that it's challenging, because what if we had a joint implementation roadmap? That would be perhaps ideal. But since the train has left the station already for the GDC, so some people are skeptical that we will be able to have an alignment of both processes. I believe, my personal view, that we still have time to do this, and of course we will continue. This is an ongoing conversation. Now have the WIS's Forum and the AI for Good Summit next month in Geneva, and we have the zero draft for the WIS's process. We had the elements paper, but it was very cautious in terms of proposals. So we see how it goes. But of course, it's something that we need to address and to have a successful outcome.
Thank you. I want to make sure also Katie has the last word. You can pick your question, or I think there was a very interesting point. But.
Thank you. So maybe I'll start with responding to the question that came from the representative from Bangladesh, and this builds out to sort of a bigger challenge that I think is an opportunity under the Global Digital Compact. So you're quite right that many refugee populations face sort of legal and regulatory barriers to being able to access the internet or mobile phone services, and it's not unique to one context. And so if we have the right level of evidence, we're able to then sort of use that to build advocacy. So, for example, under the umbrella of the Connectivity for Refugees program that we have within UNHCR, we are able to look at, it's under the title Displaced and Disconnected, we were able to identify where there are sort of legal barriers to refugees being able to sort of access mobile phones, and there has been sort of some cases where we've been able to use that to be able to sort of advocate for improved access, and maybe that's from sort of know your customer regulations, etc., and identification. Not in every context, but I think it's really important. Going back to the point of the how can we use the legal frameworks that are already in place and the mechanisms at the national and global or regional level, I think the challenge is that we actually, when it comes to particularly information integrity and the impact that it has on refugees, is it's not a very well resourced and researched area. And this is why I think collectively and working through this multi-stakeholder approach, academia are really critical, and the critical voice that we need to invite to the room to make sure that we're shining the light on some of these challenges. And so one of the things that we've really tried to do as well is identify where the legal frameworks actually do provide protection for forcibly displaced people. So one of the pieces of work that we've been working on with DLA Piper, who've been supporting us pro bono, is to identify exactly which articles in the Digital Services Act will help protect refugees, and looking, is there an extraterritorial application for the Digital Services Act? If we see incitement to violence by content created in an EU member state about refugees, for example, in extraterritorial, how does that sort of provide protection and support? Now, this is an entirely new area for UNHCR to be sort of exploring and investigating, and I think that's when it's important.
I'm mindful of the time.
I'll just wrap up. I think that's where it's really important that we actually do engage legal minds who work in the technology sector, who have been advancing maybe some of these sort of areas that aren't our normal sort of, I guess, partners that we would partnership with. Okay, over.
Thank you so much. I wanted to have these last 40 seconds or so just to thank you all for being here. And I hope this was a useful conversation. If you have questions, you can find us around at IGF. We heard questions on what do we think about this. And as you heard from the Secretary General, I think panels like this are yet again another concrete demonstration of why IGF should be strengthened, why IGF has value and should continue. And to those who ask what's our position, you heard it from the Secretary General yesterday. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and have a good afternoon or good evening.